I used to send $300 to my aunt every month after my uncle passed away, until my neighbor said something that made me stop cold. I never questioned the transfers. On the first of every month, I opened my banking app, typed in the same number, and sent $300. No memo. No message. Just the confirmation screen and that quiet feeling that I was doing what was expected. My uncle had been gone for 3 months when I started. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. One day he was fixing the fence between our houses, the next there were folding chairs in the driveway and a pot of coffee that kept boiling down to nothing. My aunt didn't ask for help. That's important. She never called. Never hinted. Never complained. I offered once, standing in her kitchen while she washed the same mug twice. "I'm okay," she said, not looking at me. "But, thank you." So I decided on the amount myself. 300 felt clean. Responsible. Not dramatic. At first, she texted every time. "Thank you. You didn't have to. I'll pay you back." I always replied with the same thing. No need. By the 4th month, the texts stopped. The money didn't. Life adjusted around it. I skipped a couple of dinners out. Let my gym membership lapse. Told myself this was temporary, just until she found her footing. That was the story I told myself. Then one evening I was bringing the trash bins back from the curb when my neighbor, Mrs. Calder, leaned over the low fence between our yards. She had lived there longer than anyone. Knew everyone's routines. Who parked where. Who argued behind closed doors. She watched me for a second, then said casually, "You're a good nephew. Sending money like that." I froze, one hand still on the bin. "I'm sorry." She smiled. Not unkindly. Just observant. "Your aunt." The monthly transfers. 300, right? My stomach tightened. "How would you know that?" She shrugged. "She mentioned it. At the pharmacy." That didn't feel right. My aunt didn't talk about money. She barely talked at all. Mrs. Calder tilted her head, studying my face, then added, "You know she doesn't need it, right?" Too quickly. "What do you mean?" "She paid off the house last year," she said. "Your uncle left her very comfortable." The bin slipped from my hand and tipped onto its side. Empty but loud. Mrs. Calder didn't move to help. She just kept talking. "And the life insurance paid out already. My cousin works at the same credit union. Word gets around." I stood there, listening to the sound of blood in my ears. "No," I said. "That's not possible." She looked almost sorry for me. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "I assumed you knew." That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my banking history and counted. One transfer. Then another. Then another. $2,400. I replayed every interaction with my aunt since the funeral. Every quiet thank you. Every time she changed the subject when I mentioned work being tight. I thought about the way she never said she needed the money, only that she appreciated it. And I realized something that made my chest feel hollow. I had never actually asked. Not once. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, knowing that by morning I would have to decide whether to confirm what my neighbor said or keep paying for the comfort of not knowing. Because if she was lying, it meant this wasn't help. It was something else entirely. And I wasn't sure I wanted to know what. I didn't confront her right away. That surprised me. I always thought I was the kind of person who would ask directly, clear the air, fix things. But once Mrs. Calder's words settled in, something held me back. Not fear. Caution. The next morning, I did what I'd done every month before. Nothing. I waited. 2 days passed. Then 3. No message from my aunt. No check-in. No, everything okay? That silence felt heavier than any accusation. On the 4th day, I drove past her house on my way home from work. Her lights were on. Curtains open. A new car sat in the driveway, not new, but newer than the old sedan she'd driven for years. I noticed it because I had never seen it before. I told myself there were explanations. Rental. Friend visiting. Temporary. But the unease stayed. The following week, she called. Her voice was warm, familiar. Too familiar. "I just wanted to check in," she said. "You've been quiet." I waited. She didn't mention the money. I've been busy, I replied. The pause. Then, everything okay? There was. Not concern, timing. Yeah, I said. Just tightening things up a bit. Another pause. Shorter this time. Well, she said lightly, you know I appreciate everything you've been doing. Truly. She still didn't ask if the transfer was coming. When we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, engine off, hands on the wheel. That was the moment the story in my head cracked. If she needed the money, she would have asked. If she was struggling, she would have hinted. Instead, she was monitoring silence. I started paying attention after that. Quietly. I noticed the packages. 1 or 2 a week, sometimes more. Always delivered in the afternoon. I noticed the way she'd stopped buying store-brand groceries. The gardener who came twice a month now, not once. The new phone she held a little too carefully when she checked messages. None of it screamed wealth. But none of it matched need. Still, I didn't stop the transfers. That's the part one don't like admitting. On the first of the next month, I sent the $300 again. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see what would happen. Her response came faster than ever. Thank you, Redheart. Just that. No apology. No explanation. No mention of repayment. A heart. Something shifted in me then. Not anger. Distance. I decided I wouldn't accuse. I would confirm. So I did something I'd avoided since the funeral. I went through my uncle's paperwork. Old emails. Bank notices. The envelope his lawyer had mailed me by mistake and then asked me to forward. I hadn't opened it then. I did now. The numbers were precise. Clinical. Life insurance. Savings. Investments. Enough that my aunt would never need my help. Enough that my $300 meant nothing, financially. But emotionally? That was different. The next time I saw her in person was at a family dinner. She hugged me tightly, held on a second too long. You're too good to me, she said, loud enough for others to hear. I smiled. Said nothing. Across the table, my cousin caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, confused. Later that night as I was leaving, my aunt walked me to the door. You know, she said softly, you don't have to worry about me. I looked at her then. Really looked. I know, I said. She flinched. Just slightly. And in that small reaction, I understood something important. She knew that I knew something had changed. What she didn't know was how far I was willing to go to understand why. Because money can be returned. Trust doesn't come back that easily. And I hadn't yet decided which one I was about to take from her. I didn't change my behavior. That was deliberate. I kept calling once a week. Kept my tone steady. Kept asking the same harmless questions. Weather. Neighbors. The leak in her bathroom ceiling she'd mentioned months ago and somehow never fixed. I wanted her comfortable. Because people only slip when they feel safe. The first thing I did was stop paying attention to her and start paying attention to the patterns around her. I spoke to my cousin first, not directly. I asked about his kids. Then about college. Then, casually, whether his mom was thinking of downsizing the house. He laughed. Downsizing? She just renovated the guest bathroom. That was new. How's she paying for all that? I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. There was a pause on the line. Not suspicious. Confused. Dad planned well. And the insurance came through fast. I didn't correct him. Next, I called the credit union my uncle had used. Not asking for details, just confirming something vague, something innocent. The woman on the phone spoke carefully, but her pauses said more than her words. Yes, the accounts were settled last year, she said. Everything was transferred properly. Transferred. Not frozen. Not delayed. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook I hadn't used since college. I wrote dates. Transfers. Conversations. Reactions. I wrote down one sentence Mrs. Calder had said, word for word. I assumed you knew. That assumption mattered. Then I did the hardest thing. I went back through my own messages. Every thank you from my aunt. Every heart emoji. Every, you didn't have to. I noticed something I'd missed before. She never once said I need this. She said you are kind. There's a difference. The next transfer date approached, And for the first time, I didn't know what I would do. I decided on a test. On the first of the month, I didn't send the money. I waited until noon. At 12:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. Everything okay? No greeting. No context. I replied an hour later. Busy morning. At 3:02 p.m., just checking in. At 6:30 p.m., she called. I didn't mean to worry you, she said quickly. I just hadn't heard from you. I've been thinking, I said, about my finances. Another pause. Longer now. Well, she said carefully, of course. You have to take care of yourself. She still didn't say the word. Money. I waited. Silence stretched. Then she added, almost as an afterthought. You know, whatever you decide is fine. That night, I didn't send the transfer. The next morning, there was a message waiting. I hope I didn't do anything to upset you. Not are you okay? Not do you need help? Did I upset you? That was the moment the investigation ended and something else began. Because now it wasn't about money. It was about control. I replied simply, we should talk in person. She agreed immediately. Too quickly. We met 2 days later at her house. Same kitchen. Same mug. But something in the air had changed. She offered me tea and watched my hands as I wrapped them around the cup. I heard something, I said, finally. And I need you to clear it up. Her shoulders tensed. Just a fraction. I was told you're financially comfortable, I continued. That you've been settled since last year. She didn't deny it. She sighed instead. I didn't think it mattered, she said. That was the first real crack. Because when I asked, why didn't you tell me? She looked down and said something I will never forget. Because you offered. And it made you feel needed. The room went very quiet. In that sentence, she admitted more than she realized. Not just what she took, but why. And sitting there, staring at the woman who had watched me grow up, I understood this wasn't going to end with an apology. It was going to end with a consequence. I just hadn't decided yet who it would fall on. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of anything either. Not yet. I just let the silence sit between us after she said it. It made you feel needed. She reached for her mug, realized it was empty, then set it back down without standing up. A small, unnecessary movement. People do that when they feel exposed. That's not fair, she added quickly. I never asked you for anything. You didn't have to, I said. She looked up then. Really looked at me. Measuring. I lost my husband, she said. Everything changed overnight. I know, I replied. I was there. She nodded, but her eyes drifted past me toward the window. I didn't lie, she said. I just didn't correct you. That distinction mattered to her. It mattered a lot. I closed my notebook and slid it into my bag. I need to be clear, I said. The money stops. She inhaled sharply. Not dramatically, instinctively. For now, I added. Until I understand what this actually was. Her face hardened just enough for me to notice. So this is about money after all, she said. No, I replied. It's about consent. That's when her tone changed. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said something that erased any chance of this ending quietly. You're acting like I took advantage of you. I didn't answer. She continued. You're an adult. You made a choice. If you're feeling embarrassed now, that's not on me. There was. Not guilt. Not gratitude. Just reframing. I stood up. I'll need the total back, I said. Every transfer. Her laugh was short. Sure. You gave that money freely. Yes, I said. Based on incomplete information. She shook her head. You'll ruin our relationship over this? I paused at the door. You already did, I said. I just noticed. I left before she could respond. That night, I totaled everything again. Same number. Same final line. $2,400. The next morning, I received an email from her lawyer. Not a message. Not a call. An email. Polite. Formal. From. It explained that the funds were considered gifts, given voluntarily, with no written agreement. It suggested that pursuing repayment would be emotionally costly, and legally unnecessary. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to my own attorney. That was the point of no return. Because once lawyers are involved, the story stops being about feelings and starts being about records. Bank statements. Timelines. Intent. I gathered everything. Screenshots. Emails. Transfer confirmations. Notes from conversations. Even the message where she wrote, "You didn't have to," sent after the third payment, once she already knew she didn't need it. My attorney was quiet while he read. Then he looked up and said, "This isn't about repayment." I waited. "This is about misrepresentation," he continued. "And leverage." A week later, my aunt called again. "Softer now. Careful. Let's not make this ugly," she said. I didn't argue. "I agree," I said. "That's why I'm proceeding." She went silent. I hung up. Because some lines, once crossed, don't invite discussion. They demand consequence. And the next step wouldn't be private. It would be visible. Once the lawyer emails started, I stopped talking. That was strategic. Silence does something interesting to people who are used to controlling the story. It forces them to imagine outcomes they can't manage. My aunt tried twice more. One voicemail. One text. "Let's be adults. Family shouldn't involve outsiders." I didn't respond. Instead, I prepared. Not for a confrontation, but for witnesses. Because private truths can be denied. Public records can't. The first thing I learned was that my uncle's estate hadn't just been well managed. It had been precisely managed. He'd updated beneficiaries less than a year before his death. Included notes. Clarified intent. He had even written a short letter, addressed to no one in particular, explaining that he didn't want anyone feeling obligated after he was gone. Everyone should live their own life, he'd written. No one owes anyone anything. That line stayed with me. The second thing I learned was harder. My aunt hadn't told just me. She had mentioned my support, casually, to friends, to distant relatives, to people who had no business knowing. Always framed the same way. He insists. He worries about me. I don't know how to say no. That framing mattered. It made her generous for accepting. And me noble for giving. A clean story. Convenient. I realized then why repayment was never going to happen voluntarily. It wasn't about the money. It was about the image. If she paid me back, the story collapsed. So I took that leverage away. With my attorney's guidance, we filed a formal notice, not demanding repayment, but requesting disclosure. Full financial transparency related to the period during which the transfers occurred. It was legal. It was restrained. And it was devastating. Because it meant one thing. Her finances were no longer private. A week later, we attended a mediation session. Neutral office. Long table. Water glasses untouched. She arrived composed. Dressed carefully. Smiled at me like we were still playing our old roles. "I don't understand why this needs to be so extreme," she said, looking at the mediator. "This is a misunderstanding." I said nothing. My attorney slid a folder across the table. Inside were the timelines. The transfer dates. The renovation invoices. The car purchase. The insurance payout confirmation. Each one lined up. The mediator's expression changed slowly, professionally. My aunt looked at the folder. Then at me. "You went through my life," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I went through mine." That was the moment the balance shifted. Not because she was exposed, but because she realized she wasn't in control anymore. The mediator cleared his throat. "It appears," he said carefully, "that there was a reasonable assumption of need on one side and a lack of correction on the other." My aunt opened her mouth to object, then stopped. Because objecting would require explaining. And explaining would require honesty. For the first time since this started, she looked tired. Not sad. Not guilty. Just tired. The session ended without resolution. But it didn't need one. Because 2 days later, I received a new email. Different tone. Different lawyer. It offered repayment. Full amount. No admission of wrongdoing. In exchange for closure. I read it once. Then again. I thought about my uncle's letter. About the word owed. Then I replied with a single sentence. "I'll accept the repayment, But the record stands. That was the real consequence. Not the money coming back, but the story no longer belonging to her. I didn't respond to the repayment offer right away. Not because I was undecided, but because I wanted to feel what it was like to not rush toward relief. For months, I had been reacting, adjusting, calculating. Now the momentum had stopped, and the silence felt unfamiliar. Almost dangerous. Silence gives people time to rewrite things in their heads. I let 3 days pass. On the 4th day, my cousin called. Not angry. Not defensive. Just confused. Mom says there's some legal thing going on, he said. Something about money you sent her? I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. I didn't involve you, I said. And I wasn't planning to. I know, he replied quickly. She's saying you blindsided her. There it was again. The framing. I asked her a direct question, I said. She chose not to answer honestly. He exhaled. She said you're punishing her for accepting help. I waited before replying. That's not what happened, I said. And deep down she knows it. Another pause. Then, she's been upset. I know, I said. So have I. When the call ended, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't spreading loudly. It was spreading selectively. She wasn't denying the facts. She was managing perception, deciding who heard which version and when. That told me the offer wasn't closure. It was containment. That night, I reread her lawyer's email. Every sentence was careful, neutral, designed to end a process without naming it. No apology, no acknowledgement, just money in exchange for silence. I thought about how easily I could accept, how clean it would feel to close this chapter and move on. But something stopped me, because if I accepted quietly, the story would still end with me as the overzealous nephew who made things uncomfortable. And I wasn't willing to carry that. So I asked my attorney a single question. What happens if I don't accept yet? He didn't hesitate. She'll worry, he said. And worried people act. That's what I wanted. A week passed. No response from me. Then another message arrived, this one not from a lawyer. From her. I never meant to hurt you. I hope one day you understand. No mention of the money. No mention of truth. Just emotion, floating free of accountability. I stared at the message for a long time before locking my phone and placing it face down on the table. This was the slow part people don't talk about. The part where nothing happens, but everything is decided. Because I understood now that this wasn't going to end with a confrontation or a dramatic reveal. It was going to end with a choice. Not hers. And whatever I chose next would decide not just how this story ended, but who controlled it afterward. I didn't reply to her message. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For the first time since my uncle died, I wasn't trying to be understood. I was trying to be accurate. I started noticing how often people confuse the two. A few days later, the repayment arrived anyway. No warning. No discussion. A single deposit. $2,400. Exact. Final. When I saw it, my first instinct was relief. My shoulders loosened. My breath slowed. The practical part of my brain whispered, it's over. But that relief lasted less than a minute. Because repayment without acknowledgement is not resolution. It's erasure. By paying me back silently, she wasn't making things right, she was trying to reset the timeline. As if the money had been a misunderstanding that corrected itself. As if nothing else had happened in between. I called my attorney. She sent it, I said. I know, he replied. Her lawyer notified us. And now she expects you to disappear. That word landed heavier than I expected. Disappear. I looked at the transaction again. The date. The reference number. No note attached. I'm not going to send it back, I said. But I'm not closing this either. He was quiet for a moment. Then you understand what that means, he said. I do. It meant escalation, not in volume but in precision. The next step wasn't legal. It was personal. I asked for a family meeting. Nothing formal. No accusations. Just dinner. Neutral ground. People who mattered, but not everyone. My cousin. His wife. One aunt from my mother's side. No lawyers. No paperwork. My aunt hesitated before agreeing. That hesitation told me everything. The dinner was set for the following Saturday. All week, I prepared, not arguments, but facts. I wrote nothing down. I didn't rehearse speeches. I focused on sequence. What happened first? What happened next? What was said? What wasn't? Because lies unravel when they're forced into order. Saturday came quietly. When I arrived, my aunt hugged me like nothing had changed. Same pressure. Same familiar perfume. I hugged her back. That surprised her. Dinner was polite. Surface level. Weather. Plans for the summer. No one mentioned money. Not yet. It wasn't until dessert, when plates were cleared and attention softened, that my cousin spoke. So, he said, glancing between us, I feel like there's something we're all dancing around. The room went still. I set my fork down. Yes, I said. There is. My aunt looked at me sharply. I didn't look back at her. I looked at the table. At the people who had known me my whole life. I sent money every month because I believed something that wasn't true, I said. When I learned that, I asked for clarity. I didn't get it. My cousin frowned. What do you mean? Before I could answer, my aunt spoke. He's exaggerating, she said lightly. This has become bigger than it ever needed to be. I turned to her then. No, I said. It became exactly as big as it needed to be. I just stopped pretending. Silence again. This was the moment I felt the second turn lock into place. Because once you speak plainly in front of witnesses, there's no going back to private versions of the truth. And I knew, watching her grip the edge of the table, that she understood it too. No one spoke right away. That kind of silence isn't empty. It's crowded. Everyone is thinking the same thing, but no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. My aunt broke it. I don't see why we're discussing private family matters like this, she said, smiling toward my cousin's wife. Some things don't need an audience. That word, audience, was doing a lot of work. I didn't bring this up, I replied. You did. When you accepted money you didn't need and let me believe otherwise. Her smile stiffened. That's your interpretation. I nodded slowly. Then let's check the facts. I turned to my cousin. Did your mom ever tell you she was struggling financially? He hesitated. Looked at her. Then back at me. No, he said. She said she was fine. Comfortable, actually. My aunt exhaled through her nose. A controlled breath. And did she ever tell you, I continued, that I was sending money every month because she needed it? Another pause. She said you insisted, he said, that you were worried about her. I didn't interrupt. And that she didn't know how to say no, he added. There was. Exactly as I'd heard before. I turned back to her. Did you ever tell him you didn't need it? I asked. She looked at her hands. Then up again. I didn't think it was necessary. The room shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Like weight being redistributed. So, my cousin said slowly, you were okay financially, and you let him keep sending money? She straightened. I didn't let him, she said. He's not a child. I didn't manipulate anyone. I leaned forward slightly. Did you ever correct the assumption? I asked. She opened her mouth. Closed it. That was the contradiction. Not spoken, but visible. Because manipulation doesn't always look like pressure. Sometimes it looks like silence that benefits one side consistently. My cousin's wife spoke for the first time. I don't mean this badly, she said carefully. But if you knew he was sacrificing, why wouldn't you say something? My aunt's answer came fast. Because I didn't ask him to. That line landed flat. It was technically true, and emotionally empty. I felt something then. Not vindication. Alignment. No one was attacking her. No one was raised-voiced or dramatic. They were just recalibrating. Re-seeing. I stood up, not to dominate the moment, but to end it. I didn't ask for this dinner to shame anyone, I said. I asked for it so there would be one version of the truth in this family. I looked at my aunt. And now there is. She didn't respond. Not immediately. But as I put on my jacket, I noticed something small. She wasn't watching me. She was watching them. That's when I understood what this part of the process was really about. Not exposure. Redistribution. Because once people see a pattern clearly, they don't need convincing. They adjust on their own. And walking out that night, I knew the consequences had started, not loudly, not legally, but socially. Which, in some families, lasts much longer. Nothing dramatic happened after that dinner. No calls. No arguments. No follow-up messages trying to clarify. At first, it almost felt anticlimactic. Then the invitations changed. A barbecue at my cousin's house, something she usually hosted, came from him instead. A group chat about holiday plans excluded her at first, then added her later, almost as an afterthought. Small things. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. But I was. Because consequence rarely arrives as punishment. It arrives as adjustment. People recalibrate once they feel uncertain. They pull back, not out of anger, but out of caution. And caution is isolating. I heard about it indirectly. She seems quieter lately, my cousin said during a call about something unrelated. She keeps asking if you're upset with her, his wife added another time. I never asked them to explain. I never asked them to choose sides. I didn't need to. What mattered was that the story had stopped circulating with only one voice. A month passed. Then two. My aunt sent a message. Neutral. Carefully worded. I hope you're well. I've been doing some thinking. I didn't reply immediately. When I finally did, I kept it short. I'm glad. That was it. No reopening. No reassurance. Because reassurance would have restored the old balance. The one where I absorbed discomfort so she wouldn't have to. Around that time, something else shifted. At a family gathering I almost skipped, she arrived late. Sat closer to the edge of conversations. Spoke less. When she laughed, it came a beat too late, like she was checking whether it was safe first. No one confronted her. No one referenced the money. But people watched. And when she spoke about generosity or sacrifice, topics she used to lean on, someone would gently redirect the conversation. Not dismissively. Just away. That's when I understood the real cost. It wasn't reputational damage in the obvious sense. It was loss of authority. She no longer controlled the moral framing of the room. And for someone who had built her comfort on quiet influence, that loss was profound. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Mrs. Calder while checking the mail. She smiled knowingly. Things settle? She asked. Yes, I said. They did. She nodded. Truth has a way of doing that. Eventually. As I walked back inside, I thought about how long I'd mistaken peace for silence, and silence for kindness. This phase of the story didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight redistribution. I was no longer carrying something that didn't belong to me. And she was learning what it felt like to carry the full shape of her choices, without anyone rushing to soften them. The strangest part came later. Not during the tension. Not during the silence. But after everything had supposedly settled. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. That absence confused me at first. I kept waiting for a delayed wave, for resentment to show up one morning, heavy and sharp. It never did. What replaced it was something quieter and harder to name. Distance. Not physical. Emotional. I could be in the same room as my aunt and feel neutral. Polite. Observant. Like someone watching a familiar place after the furniture has been rearranged. We spoke occasionally. Birthdays. Logistics. Group messages. Nothing hostile. Nothing intimate. She tried. We were alone in the kitchen after a family lunch, loading plates into the dishwasher. She handed me a towel and said, without looking at me, I miss how close we were. I dried a plate carefully before answering. We were close, I said. But not for the reasons I thought. She turned then, studied my face. That's not fair, she said quietly. I know, I replied. Neither was the situation. She opened her mouth, then closed it. That was becoming a pattern. Some things didn't heal because they couldn't. Trust, once adjusted, doesn't snap back into place just because time passes. It resets at a different distance. Other things did heal. I stopped feeling responsible for other people's comfort. Stopped filling silences that weren't mine to fill. Stopped offering help just to prevent awkwardness. I noticed it at work first, how easily I said no. Then with friends. Then with family. Boundaries aren't loud. They don't announce themselves. They just pulled. One night, months later, I found an old text from my aunt while cleaning out my phone. One of the early ones. You didn't have to. I read it again, slowly. She was right. I didn't. But I also didn't know what I was consenting to. That distinction stayed with me. The relationship never returned to what it was. But something else emerged in its place, clarity. No more guessing games. No more quiet sacrifices. No more help offered in the dark. And while that clarity cost me a version of family I thought I had, it gave me something sturdier in return. Self-respect that didn't depend on being needed. That felt like a fair exchange. Still, there was one thing unresolved. One final interaction that hadn't happened yet. Because closure doesn't always come when you want it. Sometimes it waits until someone else decides they're ready to say the one thing they've been avoiding. And I knew, deep down, that moment was coming. It happened on a Tuesday. Not a holiday. Not a birthday. Nothing symbolic enough to prepare for. My phone rang in the late afternoon, and when I saw her name, I knew, before answering, that this wouldn't be small talk. I let it ring once more than usual. Then I picked up. "Hi," she said. Her voice sounded different. Not fragile. Just stripped down. Like someone who had stopped rehearsing. "Hi," I replied. We sat in silence for a few seconds. I didn't rush to fill it. Neither did she. "I've been thinking a lot," she said finally. "I know," I answered. And I meant it. Another pause. "I want to say something," she continued. "And I need you to let me finish." "I will," I said. She took a breath. I could hear it clearly through the phone. "I knew you thought I needed the money," she said. "From the beginning." I didn't react. I didn't interrupt. I told myself it wasn't a lie, she went on, because I never said the words. But I understood what you believed. And I didn't stop it. Her voice tightened slightly, but she kept going. "After your uncle died, people stopped checking on me once they knew I was fine. You didn't. You stayed. You worried. And that mattered more to me than I want to admit." I closed my eyes. "So I let it continue," she said. "Not because I needed the money, but because I needed the role it put me in." That was the cleanest version of the truth I had heard yet. "I'm sorry," she added. "Not for the situation, but for pretending I didn't know what I was doing." I waited a moment before speaking. "Thank you for saying it," I said. She exhaled. Relief, I realized. The kind that comes when someone finally sets something down. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quickly. "I just didn't want this to be the last thing between us." I chose my words carefully. "It won't be," I said. "But it won't be forgotten either." She was quiet. "I understand," she said. And for the first time, I believed her. We didn't talk long after that. No revisiting details. No emotional cleanup. Just a mutual understanding that the truth had arrived, but not at the moment that could change the outcome. After the call ended, I sat still for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel validated. I felt finished. Because some confessions aren't keys. They're receipts. They don't reopen doors. They just confirm why they closed. And that was enough. Nothing changed overnight after that call. That's what surprised me most. I didn't wake up lighter. I didn't feel some dramatic release. The world didn't rearrange itself to mark the moment when the truth was finally spoken out loud. Instead, life continued, just with fewer internal negotiations. I noticed it in small, ordinary moments. When my aunt's name appeared in group chats, I read without scanning for subtext. When she spoke at gatherings, I listened without the old reflex to protect her image or mine. I wasn't bracing anymore. Acceptance doesn't feel like peace at first. It feels like neutrality. The kind where your body stops preparing for impact that never comes. We saw each other a few times after that. Polite. Functional. Human. She didn't try to reframe the past again. Didn't offer explanations or ask for reassurance. That restraint told me more than apologies ever could. Once, while walking to our cars after a family event, she said, "I'm trying to get used to not being the person everyone leans toward." I nodded. "That takes time," I said. It was the closest we came to speaking about it again. I realized then that acceptance isn't about forgiveness or punishment. It's about placement. Everyone was back where they belonged. She no longer held unspoken leverage over my sense of responsibility. I no longer carried quiet guilt disguised as generosity. And the family, without effort or announcement, had recalibrated around the truth. There were no sides. Just clarity. I began to understand how much energy I'd spent maintaining something that wasn't mine to sustain. How often I'd confused being needed with being valued. Once that confusion cleared, space opened up. Not dramatic space. Useful space. For us. For decisions made without emotional debt. For help given only when it was asked for, and honest. One evening, I deleted the last screenshots from my phone. The bank confirmations. The notes. The records. Not because they didn't matter. Because they had already done their job. They had protected the truth long enough for it to stand on its own. And as I did, I realized something simple and steady. The story wasn't about money. It never was. It was about what happens when you stop confusing silence with kindness, and start choosing clarity even when it costs comfort. That lesson stayed. Quietly. I didn't notice the change right away. It showed up gradually, disguised as preference. I chose different seats at dinners. I let calls go to voicemail without explaining why. I paused before offering help, just long enough to ask myself a question I had never asked before. Was this asked for, or am I filling a silence? That question rewired things. At work, a colleague hinted, carefully, about needing support on a project that wasn't mine. I listened. I nodded. I waited. When the hint didn't turn into a request, I didn't step in. Nothing collapsed. Another time, a friend vented about money, circling the topic the way people do when they want you to volunteer. I offered advice. Not funds. The conversation shifted. We stayed friends. That surprised me more than anything. I realized how often generosity had been my shortcut out of discomfort. How quickly I used it to stabilize rooms, smooth edges, prove something, mostly to myself. I thought about my uncle then. About the letter he wrote without knowing who would read it. About the line that had stayed with me. No one owes anyone anything. For a long time, I'd misunderstood that sentence. I thought it meant detachment, coldness, independence at all costs. Now I heard it differently. It meant that help only has value when it's chosen clearly, on both sides. When it's offered without pressure. When it's received without pretense. I started defining generosity not by sacrifice, but by transparency. I would help, but only when asked. I would give, but never to buy peace. I would stay, but not at the cost of clarity. That shift didn't make me harder. It made me steadier. Months later, my aunt and I crossed paths at a small gathering. We talked briefly about neutral things. She mentioned volunteering somewhere new. Sounded sincere. I wished her well, and meant it. When we said goodbye, there was no ache. No unfinished sentence hanging in the air. Just closure that didn't need to announce itself. Driving home, I thought about how easily this story could have ended differently. How easily I could have taken the repayment and erased the rest. How comfortable that would have been. But comfort isn't always the same as resolution. Sometimes, resolution is quieter. Slower. It stretches forward instead of closing backward. It changes how you move through future rooms. And I knew, without needing proof, that the next time I chose to give, it would be cleaner, lighter, free of obligation. Not because I had less to offer, but because I finally knew why I was offering it. There was one final realization that came later, unexpected, almost inconvenient. About forgiveness. Not hers. I used to think forgiveness was a bridge. Something you built so two people could meet in the middle again. Something mutual. Balanced. That idea kept me stuck longer than I realized. Because bridges imply return. And not everything that ends needs a way back. The truth is, I didn't decide to forgive my aunt. Not in a single moment. It happened the way weather changes, slowly, without permission, almost unnoticed. It started when I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I noticed one evening that I hadn't imagined explaining myself to her in weeks. No inner arguments. No imagined defenses. Just quiet. That's when I understood forgiveness wasn't something I gave her. It was something I stopped carrying. I had already released the money. Already released the story. Already released the role I'd been playing. What remained was the residue, the emotional habit of vigilance. Letting go of that took longer. Forgiveness, for me, turned out not to be reconciliation. We didn't rebuild intimacy. We didn't restore trust. We didn't pretend. Forgiveness was simply this. I no longer needed her to understand me for my version of the truth to stand. Once that need disappeared, so did the tension. I could see her clearly then, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as someone who made a quiet, self-protective choice and lived with its consequences. So did I. We were both changed by it, just in different directions. There was relief in that symmetry. At a family gathering months later, I watched her laughing with someone new, telling a story I didn't know. I felt no pull to be part of it. No bitterness either. Just distance that felt appropriate. I realized forgiveness wasn't about warmth. It was about freedom. Freedom from revisiting. Freedom from explaining. Freedom from waiting for someone else to become different so I could move on. I didn't need an apology that matched my standards. I didn't need a relationship that matched the past. I needed space where my generosity didn't come with a hidden cost. And I had that now. Forgiveness, I learned, comes last, after truth, after consequence, after clarity. Not before. Never before. The story didn't end with a final conversation. It ended the way most real things do, by becoming irrelevant to my daily life. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I was going through old paperwork, deciding what to shred. Receipts. Manuals. Documents that had outlived their usefulness. I found the mediation notice folded inside a notebook. I looked at it for a moment. Then I shredded it without rereading. That was how I knew it was over. Not because nothing had happened, but because it no longer asked anything of me. My aunt and I still exist in the same family orbit. We exchange greetings. We acknowledge milestones. We coexist without pretending closeness where it no longer fits. There's no tension in that now. Just accuracy. Sometimes people ask, carefully, if I regret helping her in the first place. I always answer the same way. No, I say. I regret not asking sooner what my help meant. That distinction matters. Because the money wasn't wasted. It bought clarity. It revealed a pattern. It forced a correction that needed to happen anyway. It taught me that generosity without truth is fragile, and that silence can be more manipulative than words. Most importantly, it taught me that stepping back isn't abandonment. It's alignment. Alignment with reality. With boundaries. With self-respect that doesn't need applause. I still help people. I just do it differently now. With questions. With consent. With the understanding that my value isn't measured by how necessary I make myself. The last time I saw my aunt, she hugged me goodbye like anyone else would. No extra pressure. No performance. That was enough. Because endings don't need drama to be real. Sometimes they're just the moment you stop revisiting and start living forward without carrying what no longer belongs to you. That's where the story ends. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just complete. If this story resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else who's still carrying something they shouldn't. Subscribe if you want more real, slow burn stories like this, where truth matters more than drama.